Cursed vows. Forbidden love or war. The first time I saw him, I was hiding a body. Not my kill, but one I'd found cooling in the moss-slick alley behind the sunken goose. My knife was in my hand, my breath a pale ghost in the biting cold. The dead man wore the midnight blue of House Kragen, the silver kraken brooch at his throat glinting with a malice that outlived him. My own house, Veridian, with its proud, emerald griffin sigil, would call this a provocation. A spark thrown onto the kindling of a century-old feud. I was that spark, about to be lit. I dragged the body deeper into the shadows, the cobblestones scraping against the man's fine boots. The air here in the underbelly of Ethelgard, the city we shared and bled over, was thick with the smell of damp stone, stale ale, and violence. I was supposed to be in my tower, practicing my embroidery or some other useless skill befitting the niece of Lord Malachi Veridian. Not here, in the muck, with a dead Kragen at my feet and a forbidden, flickering power simmering under my skin. A sound. Not the scuttle of a rat or the distant revelry from the taverns. This was the deliberate, quiet footfall of a predator. I melted against the wall, into a pool of darkness so deep it felt like a second skin. My magic, that treacherous, whispering thing I kept caged behind my ribs, stirred. It loved the dark. It fed on silence. He stepped into the narrow mouth of the alley, and the very air changed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, clad in the same Kragen blue as the corpse I was trying to hide. His hair was the color of raven's wings, a stark frame for a face that was all sharp angles and reckless beauty. Even from 20 paces, I could see the tension in his frame, the way his hand rested on the hilt of his sword, not with nervousness, but with a familiarity that spoke of countless battles. This was no ordinary Kragen soldier. This was Cassian Kragen. I knew him only from whispered stories and the venomous tirades of my uncle. The prodigal son. The cursed blood. He'd been cast out of his own house, they said, for some unspeakable act of defiance. Yet here he was, back in the city, standing between me and the only exit from this alley. His gaze swept the darkness, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought those storm-gray eyes, luminous in the gloom, locked directly onto me. They didn't see me, not yet, but they saw the shape I was trying to conceal. He moved forward, silent as a wraith, and knelt beside the dead man. His shoulders tightened. A low, guttural sound of fury escaped him. Lysander, he whispered, the name a raw wound in the quiet. My fingers tightened on my knife. He knew him. This wasn't a random patrol. He was looking for this man. When he rose, he turned fully toward my shadow, and this time, there was no mistaking it. He saw me. His eyes weren't just gray, they were a tempest, a churning sea of anger and a pain so deep it felt like a physical blow. I felt stripped bare, my carefully constructed walls of ice and indifference crumbling under that single, devastating look. "Show yourself," he commanded, his voice a low thrum that vibrated in my bones. It wasn't the haughty tone of a Kragen lord. It was the sound of barely leashed power, of a storm about to break. I stepped forward, letting the darkness fall from me like a cloak. The weak light from a high window caught the emerald thread on my tunic. His eyes tracked the movement, and the storm in them darkened with recognition and fresh hatred. Veridian, he spat the name like a curse. Kragen, I returned, my voice steadier than I felt. My heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. This wasn't my doing. You stand over the body of my brother with a blade in your hand, and you expect me to believe that? He took a step closer. The air crackled, not with magic, but with the sheer, terrifying force of his presence. He was a blade himself, honed and lethal. He was already dead, I said, holding my ground. I found him. I was disposing of the evidence. To avoid a war my house did not start. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped him. Your house starts everything. You poison the wells, you burn our fields, you murder our sons in back alleys. He drew his sword. The steel sang a deadly note in the silence. And now, you will pay for it. This was it. The moment the spark caught. A duel in a filthy alley. The heir to House Kragen, cursed or not, he was still that, and the niece of House Veridian. Our deaths here would be the torch that set the entire continent ablaze. I raised my knife, a pathetic defense against his longsword. The magic under my skin writhed, begging for release. A single thought, a flick of my wrist, and I could summon a wall of shadow to blind him, or a whip of pure night to disarm him. But to use it was to sign my own death warrant. Magic was a Kragen trait, a taint in their bloodline, they said. For a Veridian to wield it was unthinkable. An abomination. He lunged. It wasn't a fencer's move. It was raw, powerful, and brutally efficient. I twisted away, the tip of his sword tearing through the sleeve of my tunic. The cold air kissed my skin. I was fast, trained in secret by my uncle's master-at-arms, but he was a force of nature. Our bodies collided as I dodged again, his free arm wrapping around me to keep his balance. For a second, we were locked together, chest to chest, in a grotesque parody of an embrace. I could feel the hard planes of his body, the heat of him searing through our clothes. The scent of him, smoke and winter pine and something wild, something inherently other, filled my senses. His breath fanned my cheek. His eyes widened, the fury in them momentarily doused by a shock that mirrored my own. This close, the connection wasn't just hatred. It was a current, a live wire of something terrifying and primal. A forbidden attraction that felt as ancient and inevitable as the feud that divided us. He shoved me back, his expression turning to stone. Fight, Veridian. Don't just dance. He came at me again, and this time, I didn't have the space to retreat. His sword arced toward my throat. It was a killing blow. And my magic broke free. It wasn't a decision. It was an instinct, a scream from my soul. Darkness erupted from me, not as a vague cloud, but as solid, tangible tendrils of night. They wrapped around his blade, halting its deadly path an inch from my skin. The world froze. Cassian stared, his gaze locked on the inky blackness coiled around his steel. The fury in his eyes was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. And something else. Something like recognition. What are you? He whispered, the words torn from him. The magic snapped back into me, leaving a hollow, aching cold. I staggered, the effort of containing it again making my knees buckle. He didn't press his advantage. He just stood there, sword lowered, staring at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. Not as a Veridian. Not as an enemy. But as me. A girl with a deadly secret, standing over a body that bound us together in a web of lies and blood. The sound of booted feet, dozens of them, echoed from the street. The city watch. Drawn by the commotion, or perhaps by a tipped-off word. Cassian's head snapped up. His eyes met mine again, and in that fractured second, an unspoken understanding passed between us. This scene, the two of us, the dead Kragen, my revealed power, was a catastrophe for us both. Run, he growled. And as the torchlight of the watch flooded the alley entrance, I turned and fled into the deeper darkness, his command and a tempest in his eyes burning a brand onto my soul. The feud was no longer an abstract thing, a story told by my uncle. It had a face. A name. Cassian. And it had just become infinitely more dangerous. The stone walls of my chambers in Veridian Keep had never felt more like a prison. For 3 days, I'd been confined, a griffin in a gilded cage. The official story, spun by my uncle's deft tongue, was that I'd been recovering from a fainting spell brought on by the noxious fumes of the lower city during an unauthorized, but mercifully brief, excursion. The truth was a locked door and a guard posted outside, a constant, grim reminder of my recklessness. My mind, however, was not locked in. It was back in that alley, trapped in the stormy gray of Cassian Kragen's eyes. "What are you?" His question was a ghost that haunted the silence between the ticks of the grandfather clock. He had seen my magic. He, a Kragen, the very house that was whispered to carry the cursed gift in their blood, had recognized the power I had spent a lifetime hiding. The power that, if discovered, would see me branded a witch, an abomination, and executed by my own kin. My uncle's love was conditional, his pride a brittle thing. He would burn me himself to protect the purity of the Veridian line. I paced the length of the woven rug, its emerald and silver threads a mockery of the freedom I'd lost. My fingers traced the cold stone of the windowsill, looking out over the sprawling city of Ethelgard. From this height, the divisions were clear. The Veridian Quarter, all elegant spires and manicured gardens, and across the serpentine curve of the River Eve, the Kragen district, a place of dark, formidable architecture and the ever-present smoke of their forges. 2 worlds, forever at war. And I was trapped in one, my soul inexplicably tethered to the other. The door to my chambers opened with a soft click. I turned, expecting the stern face of my uncle or the pinched expression of my handmaid, Lyra. It was neither. It was my cousin, Kale. Where Cassian was all storm and shadow, Kale was sunlight and solid ground. His hair was the color of wheat, his eyes a warm, dependable brown. He was the heir my uncle deserved, brave, loyal, uncomplicated. He wore the Veridian green with a natural pride I could never muster. "Lyra said you weren't eating," he said, his voice laced with concern. He carried a tray with a bowl of broth and a hunk of bread. He set it on the table by the hearth. "You need to keep your strength up, Lyra." Lyra. My name. A simple, soaring thing. It felt like a lie on his lips now. "I'm not hungry," I said, turning back to the window. I could feel his gaze on my back. "The Kragen filth," he began, his voice hardening. "The one they found dead. They're calling it an act of war. Uncle Malachi has doubled the guard on the river crossings. There's talk of preemptive action." My blood ran cold. Preemptive action. A polite term for massacre. "The man was already dead when I found him, Kale." "And what were you doing in that part of the city?" he asked, not with accusation, but with a brotherly frustration I knew well. "You know how dangerous it is. If anything had happened to you," he came to stand beside me, following my gaze across the river to the Kragen lands. "We protect our own, Lyra. That's all we're doing. But who protects me from you?" The thought was a treacherous whisper. I looked at his honest face, at the love and worry etched there, and felt a wave of shame. He was my family. Cassian was the enemy. The logic was as solid as the keep itself. So why did it feel so flimsy? "I know," I whispered, the lie ash in my mouth. He squeezed my shoulder. "Get some rest. This will all blow over. It always does. But it wouldn't. Not this time. Because the enemy had seen my secret, and that changed everything. Later that night, when the moon was a sliver of silver behind a veil of cloud, I found I couldn't sleep. The memory of the alley was a fever in my blood. The heat of Cassian's body, the scent of him, the shocking, electric stillness when my magic had flared between us. It wasn't just fear I felt. It was a pull, a terrifying, gravitational force. Driven by a compulsion I didn't understand, I went to the one place in the keep where I felt a semblance of peace, the old library. It was a cavernous, dusty room, filled with scrolls and treatises on history and genealogy that no one but me ever read. It was also the one place my magic felt less like a curse and more like a part of me. The shadows here were old friends. I lit a single candle, its flame guttering in the vast darkness. I pulled a heavy, leather-bound book from a high shelf, a history of the founding of Ethelgard. It was a safe, boring choice. But my hands were trembling. I needed to do something, to channel the restless energy coiling inside me. Closing my eyes, I focused on the memory of the alley, not of the fight, but of the moment after. The look on Cassian's face. The recognition. I let my magic seep out, not in a violent burst, but as a gentle probe, a thread of consciousness seeking an answer in the dark. The candle flame flickered wildly. The shadows in the corners of the library deepened, swirling like ink in water. And then, a whisper, so faint I thought it was the wind through the cracks in the stone. Dangerous. My eyes snapped open. The voice wasn't in the room. It was in my mind. A man's voice. Rough. Edged with warning. My heart hammered against my ribs. I shoved the magic back down, slamming the mental door shut. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. What had I done? Had I reached out? Had someone heard me? A soft tap on the glass of the library's large, leaded window made me jump nearly out of my skin. I spun around, my hand flying to my chest. There, perched precariously on the narrow stone ledge outside, was a figure silhouetted against the night sky. He was cloaked in darkness, but the pale sliver of moonlight caught the sharp angle of his jaw, the unruly fall of his dark hair. Cassian. He met my wide-eyed stare through the glass. He shouldn't be here. This was the heart of Veridian territory. It was suicide. He lifted a hand and tapped on the glass again, a quiet, insistent sound. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to sound the alarm, to have him captured or killed. He was the embodiment of everything I'd been taught to hate. But my feet were rooted to the spot. The memory of his command, "Run," echoed in my mind. He had let me go. Slowly, my breath catching in my throat, I crossed the room and unlatched the heavy window. The cold night air rushed in, carrying his scent of smoke and pine. It was an intimacy that felt more violating, and more thrilling, than any touch. "Have you lost your mind?" I hissed, my voice trembling. "If you're seen here." I had to be sure, he interrupted, his voice low and urgent. His stormy eyes scanned my face, searching for something. What I saw in the alley. Was it real? So that was it. He'd risked his life for confirmation. For the truth of my curse. The fragile hope that he might have come for any other reason shattered. "It was a trick of the light," I said, the lie brittle. "You should go." He didn't move. His gaze was relentless. Lysander wasn't killed by a blade. There was no wound. It was something else. Something that left no mark but stole the life from him. He leaned closer, his presence overwhelming in the confined space of the window frame. It was magic. And it wasn't yours. The world tilted. It wasn't yours. The words hung between us, a lifeline and a condemnation. What are you saying? I whispered. I'm saying the same hand that killed my brother tried to frame you. Or your house. His eyes held mine, the tempest in them now one of shared conspiracy. We are both pawns in this, Lyra of Veridian. And if we don't find out who is moving us, this city will drown in blood. He knew my name. Of course he did. But hearing it on his lips felt like a claim. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice barely audible. I am your enemy. A shadow of a smile, bitter and beautiful, touched his lips. Are you? He glanced over his shoulder, into the sleeping city. The enemy of my enemy. He didn't finish the saying. He didn't have to. The truth of it settled between us, heavy and terrifying. He was offering a truce. An alliance born not of trust, but of mutual survival. He began to pull back, to melt into the night from whence he came. Wait, I said, the word escaping before I could cage it. He paused, a silhouette against the star-dusted sky. How did you find me? I asked. How did you know it was this window? He looked back at me, and in the profound darkness, I saw the faint, otherworldly silver flicker in his eyes. The mark of his cursed bloodline. The same way you heard my whisper, he said softly. The magic calls to its own. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the cold library with a trembling candle, a racing heart, and the devastating knowledge that the line between enemy and ally had just been irrevocably blurred. The cage door had been opened, and I was no longer sure I wanted to stay inside. The days that followed were a study in exquisite torture. Every polite conversation in the sun-drenched great hall, every lesson in courtly etiquette, every meal under my uncle's watchful eye felt like a performance in a play whose script I had forgotten. I moved through my life as Lyra of House Veridian, but my mind was in the shadows, with him. Cassian's words were a seed planted in the fertile ground of my fear, and it had taken root, twisting through my thoughts. The same hand that killed my brother tried to frame you. Who? Another Kragen faction? A third party seeking to ignite the war? The questions were a relentless chorus, and the only person who held any of the answers was the one person I could not seek. My magic, once a quiet, slumbering beast, was now awake and restless. It prickled under my skin, a constant, humming awareness. I found myself listening to the silence, straining for another whisper, another thread of that impossible connection. I practiced in the dead of night in the library, not with bursts of power, but with control. I would hold a shadow in my palm, a sphere of perfect, liquid night, feeling its cool, sentient weight. I was learning its language, and in doing so, I was terrified I was learning his. 5 nights after his visit, the pull became unbearable. The keep was silent, asleep. The guard outside my door snored softly. I sat on the floor of my chamber, my back against the cold stone, and I let my mind drift. I didn't try to reach for him. That would be madness. I simply let go. I focused on the memory of his voice, the silver-flecked gray of his eyes, the raw, untamed energy that clung to him like a second skin. The darkness behind my eyelids swirled. The familiar, comforting shadows of my room seemed to sharpen, to gain an impossible depth. And then, a sensation, not a sound, but a presence. A consciousness brushing against the edges of my own. It was like touching a live wire. A jolt of awareness, fierce and startling, shot through me. His voice, a ragged whisper in the quiet of my mind. "You're playing with fire, Veridian." My eyes flew open. My heart was a wild drum. He was there. Not in the room, but in the connection. I could feel him, a low, thrumming frequency of tension and power on the other side of the city. "You started this," I thought back, the words a silent, desperate projection. "You came to my window." A beat of silence. I could almost feel his surprise, his wariness. Then, a wave of sensation, not words, but an impression. The chill of night air, the rough texture of stone beneath his hands, the vast, sleeping expanse of the city laid out before him. He was high up, watching. Waiting. "It's not safe to speak like this," his thought came, clearer now, laced with a sharp-edged caution. "The walls have ears. And minds. Then why are you?" I challenged, my own fear morphing into a strange, thrilling defiance. Another pause. This time, the impression was different. The scent of old paper and dust. The flicker of a single candle flame. He was remembering my library. He was remembering me. Lysander, his thought was a raw wound, laid bare in the space between us. He was researching the old magics. The forbidden texts. He believed the feud was a lie. A shield for something else. My breath caught. What something else? I don't know. But he was scared. He sent me a message the night he died. One word, Ethel. Ethel. The ancient name of the river that divided our city. The source of life, and the line of blood. The river? I asked, my mind racing. Or the one it was named for, he returned, the thought dark and heavy. Ethel the First. The king who founded this city and whose bloodline was said to be the source of all magic. The king our houses both claimed to descend from. The history was a tangled web. House Veridian and House Kragen, both sprung from the loins of a mythical, magic-wielding king, now tearing each other apart over the scraps of his legacy. You think his research got him killed, I stated, the pieces clicking into a horrifying picture. I know it did. His mental voice was grim, final. And whoever did it used the feud as a cover. They wanted a war, Lyra. They still do. The way he said my name, even in the confines of my mind, sent a shiver through me. It was not the formal, hateful, Veridian. It was an acknowledgement. A partnership. What do we do? The question was out before I could stop it, an admission of my own helplessness, my trust in his lead. I felt a surge of something from him, surprise, again, and a flicker of something warmer, something that felt dangerously like protectiveness. We be careful. We watch. Your uncle, is he planning anything? The question was a bucket of cold water. My uncle. The man who had raised me, who had given me a home, a name. And here I was, in the dead of night, mentally conspiring with his greatest enemy. He speaks of preemptive strikes, I confessed, the truth a bitter pill. The mood in the keep is, volatile. It's the same here, he thought back, and I could feel the weight of his own isolation, the burden of being the cursed son in a house of hardened warriors. My father sees your attack as the final insult. He mobilizes the war griffins as we speak. War griffins. The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through me. That was not posturing. That was a declaration. We're running out of time, I sent, the panic finally breaking through. I know. A simple, devastating acknowledgement. Then, a new sensation, a firm, solid warmth, like a hand closing over mine in the dark. It was a trick of the magic, a projection of comfort, but it felt more real than the stone floor beneath me. Meet me tomorrow night. The old Ethelbridge, where the river is narrowest. Come alone. The connection snapped, the presence vanishing from my mind so abruptly I felt physically bereft. The silence in my room was deafening. He was asking me to cross the line. Not just in thought, but in body. To leave the safety of my quarter and venture into the neutral, dangerous ground between our worlds. It was treason. It was insanity. It was the only path forward that didn't end in a pyre of my own making or a city drowned in blood. The next day was an eternity. I moved through my duties like a ghost. I nodded at my uncle's plans for reinforcing the river defenses. I smiled blandly at Kale's stories of training in the yard. All the while, my heart was a trapped bird, beating against the bars of my ribs, counting down the seconds until dusk. When night finally fell, thick and starless, I didn't hesitate. I used the shadows, my old friends, weaving them around me like a cloak. I was a wisp of darkness, slipping past the guards, down forgotten servant passages, and out through a postern gate that groaned on rusted hinges. The city beyond the keep walls was a different world. The air was free, but it was also sharp with danger. I kept to the narrowest alleys, my hood pulled low, my senses stretched taut. Every sound was a potential threat, every shadow a possible Kragen assassin, or worse, a Veridian patrol. The old Ethelbridge was a relic, a crumbling stone arch that predated the feud. It was no longer used, superseded by the larger, more fortified crossings downstream. The river here was indeed narrow, a rushing, black ribbon of water cutting through the heart of the city. He was already there. He stood in the center of the bridge, a tall, broad-shouldered silhouette against the faint glow of the city on the far bank. He wasn't hiding. He was waiting, exposed, a testament to his reckless courage. I stepped out of the shadows and onto the bridge. The ancient stones felt like a precipice. He turned as I approached. The moonlight, weak as it was, caught the planes of his face. He looked older than he had in the alley, wearier. The weight of his brother's death, his house's warmongering, his own cursed existence, it was all there, etched into the skin around his eyes. We stood there, 5 paces apart, the heirs of a war, on a bridge named for the peace we'd forgotten how to keep. "You came," he said. His voice was rough, stripped of the mental connection, more real and more devastating for its raw, physical sound. "You knew I would," I replied, my own voice barely a whisper over the rush of the river. He took a step forward. Then another. Closing the distance between us. The air crackled, charged with the same energy I'd felt in the alley, but now it was laced with something else. A terrifying, fragile hope. "The magic," he said, stopping an arm's length away. His eyes searched mine. "How long?" "Always," I admitted, the truth a confession I'd never made to another living soul. "I have to hide it." A grim understanding flickered in his gaze. "I know what that is like." He lifted his hand, and a flicker of silver, like captured starlight, danced over his fingertips. It was beautiful and deadly. The Kragen curse. They call it a gift, but it's a chain. It's why my father cast me out. Too much of the old king's power. It frightens them. He was showing me. Trusting me. The gesture was more intimate than any touch could be. "My uncle would have me killed," I whispered, the words trembling. "Then we won't let him find out," Cassian said, his voice dropping, becoming a vow. He didn't move to touch me, but the space between us felt charged, alive. We find my brother's killer. We stop this war. Together. Together. The word hung in the air between us, a bridge more fragile and more daring than the stone beneath our feet. I looked into the tempest of his eyes and saw not my enemy, but my only ally. My only chance. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. In that moment, on the crumbling bridge over the dark water, the feud ceased to exist. There was only the two of us, the whispered magic in our blood, and the terrifying, glorious beginning of something that felt an awful lot like fate. The world had fractured into two distinct realities. There was the sunlit world of Veridian Keep, where I was Lyra, the dutiful niece, the caged griffin. I attended council meetings with my uncle, my face a placid mask as he pointed to maps, his finger tracing lines of attack across the river. I listened to Kale speak of honor and glory, his words now sounding hollow, a child's fantasy of a game that was drenched in real blood. This reality was built on lies, its foundations the very feud that was being manipulated to destroy us all. Then there was the shadow world. The world of the old Ethelbridge, of whispered conversations in the dead of night, of Cassian. We met as often as we dared, which was never enough. The risk was astronomical, a heady cocktail of terror and exhilaration that left me breathless. Each meeting was a stolen jewel, precious and fragile. We never met in the same place twice. Sometimes it was the dusty silence of an abandoned observatory that overlooked both quarters. Other times, the echoing vastness of a derelict temple dedicated to the forgotten gods of Ethel I. Once, breathtakingly, he led me through a hidden passage into the catacombs that ran like stone veins beneath the city itself, a network of the dead that the living had forgotten. It was in these stolen moments that the faceless enemy of our houses began to take shape. We became co-conspirators, archaeologists of a dangerous truth. Lysander was convinced the source of the magic was tied to the founder's line. Cassian told me one night in the observatory, his voice low as he traced the constellations painted on the domed ceiling. Not just a bloodline, but a physical place. A source of power. The heart of Ethel, I murmured, recalling the old legends from my books. A mythical fount of magic that the king was said to have drunk from. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming in the starlight filtering through the broken roof. You know the stories. I know the stories my uncle calls children's fables, I said, a wry twist to my lips. He says the only power is steel and will. Your uncle is a fool, Cassian said, but without his usual heat. It was a simple statement of fact. Magic isn't a fable. It's a tide. It can be damned, ignored, but it never truly disappears. It just finds new vessels. His gaze was heavy on me. On us. We pooled our knowledge. His, gleaned from his brother's frantic, secretive research. Mine, from the dry histories I devoured in solitude. The picture that emerged was chilling. Both our houses possessed fragments of an old, ceremonial dagger, the dagger of Ethel, said to be the key to unlocking the heart. The Veridians had the hilt, inlaid with a griffin of jade. The Kragens had the blade, forged from star iron and etched with a kraken. They were never meant to be separated, I realized aloud one night in the catacombs, our voices echoing off the skull-lined walls. It's a lock and key. The feud, it wasn't just about land or pride. It was about keeping the pieces apart. Cassian stopped, turning to face me. The single shard of glowmoss he held cast dancing shadows across his face. But why? If this heart holds the power our ancestors wielded, why hide it? Why let our families tear each other apart for centuries over the pieces? The question hung in the cold, damp air, unanswered. The silence was a living thing, thick with implication. The killer, the puppeteer pulling our strings, had to be someone who benefited from the status quo. Someone who feared a united houses and the power they could wield. The investigation was a dangerous thread we pulled at, but it was the space between the words, the unspoken thing that grew with every meeting, that truly threatened to undo me. It was in the way his hand would brush against mine as he passed me an ancient scroll. The way our shoulders would touch as we huddled over a single light source. The way his laughter, a rare, rough sound that seemed to surprise even him, would warm a part of me I hadn't known was cold. One night, by the riverbank far from the bridges, the tension snapped. We had been arguing about the best way to search the Kragen archives without alerting his father. The debate was heated, fueled by frustration and the relentless pressure of time. I turned to make a point, and he moved at the same moment, and suddenly we were standing chest to chest, the space between us evaporating. The air left my lungs. All the words, the plans, the fear, fell away. There was only the solid heat of him, the faint scent of smoke and pine that was uniquely his, and the storm in his eyes as they dropped to my lips. "This is madness," I whispered, the protest weak, a token resistance against the tide rising inside me. "I know," he breathed, his voice ragged. He didn't move away. His gaze was a physical caress, searing and possessive. "You're a Kragen. You're a Veridian." The names, once curses, were now just words. Empty labels that could not contain what was happening between us. "They will kill us if they find out," I said, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips, the one I dreamed about. "Then they must not find out." His hand came up, not with violence, but with a heartbreaking slowness. He cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking the arch of my cheekbone. His touch was calloused from the sword, but his hold was impossibly gentle. It was the touch of a man who knew his own strength and chose to temper it. It was my undoing. I leaned into his touch, a silent surrender. A sound escaped him, half groan, half prayer, and then his mouth was on mine. The world exploded. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a conflagration. It was the release of weeks of pent-up tension, of forbidden glances, of shared secrets and a connection that ran deeper than blood or name. It was desperation and hope, fury and tenderness, all forged into a single, devastating act. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me flush against him, and I melted into the solid strength of him, my hands tangling in the dark silk of his hair. The magic under my skin sang, not in protest, but in recognition, twining with the raw, untamed power that radiated from him. We were two halves of a broken seal, and in that kiss, for one blinding, perfect moment, we were whole. When we finally broke apart, gasping for air, foreheads resting together, the world had irrevocably changed. The river rushed on, the city slept, but the axis of my universe had tilted. His eyes, dark and dazed, searched mine. "Lyra," he whispered, my name a vow on his lips. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I just pressed closer, my answer in the way my body curved into his. We didn't find any answers in the archives that night. We didn't solve the mystery of the killer or the heart of Ethel. We simply stood there, in the shadow of the city that wanted us dead, and held on to each other as if we were the only real thing in a world of lies. It was the most treacherous discovery of all. The investigation had been a pretext, a road that led us here, to this. The real secret we'd uncovered wasn't a political conspiracy. It was us. And I knew, with a terrifying, soul-deep certainty, that this was a truth for which I would burn the world down. The gilded cage of House Veridian could no longer hold me. I had tasted freedom in the arms of my enemy, and it was a poison I would gladly drink forever. The scent of him, smoke and winter pine, lingered on my skin like a brand long after I'd slipped back into the keep, a ghost of the paradise I'd found in the ruins. It was a tangible secret I carried through the sunlit lies of the next day, a shimmering thread connecting me to the shadow world where I was truly alive. Every polite smile I gave my uncle felt like a betrayal of that truth. Every concerned glance from Kale was a stone added to the wall of my guilt. The peace, the fragile truce we'd stolen by the river, was shattered 2 nights later by the scream of war griffins. I was jolted from a fitful sleep by the sound, a piercing, predatory shriek that tore through the night. I raced to my window, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs. Against the moonlit sky, I saw them. Enormous, leonine shapes with the fierce heads and vast wings of eagles, silhouetted by the orange glow of fire from the Kragen quarter. They were not our Veridian steeds, bred for elegance and speed. These were the Kragen beasts, larger, more brutal, armored in jagged, blackened steel. They were attacking the riverfront warehouses. A preemptive strike. Cassian's father had moved first. Chaos erupted within the keep. Shouts echoed through the stone corridors, the clatter of armor and the ring of drawn swords a dissonant symphony of war. I threw on a dark tunic and leggings, my fingers fumbling with the laces. My magic prickled, a restless hound sensing the hunt. I found my uncle in the main courtyard, a statue of cold fury clad in emerald plate armor. Kale was at his side, his face a mask of grim determination. They burn our grain stores. Malachi Veridian's voice cut through the din, sharp as a blade. They think to starve us out before the first sword is crossed. Kale. Take the griffin wing to the northern docks. Hold the line. I will lead the main force to the central bridge. Uncle, let me come, I pleaded, grabbing his armored forearm. I can fight. His eyes, the same shade of green as mine but devoid of their warmth, swept over me with dismissive scorn. You will stay in the keep, Lyra, where you belong. This is not a game for girls with knives. He shook off my grip and mounted his waiting griffin, its feathers the color of polished jade. This is the answer to their treachery. Now they will see the true mettle of House Veridian. He soared into the smoke-choked sky, his guard following. Kale gave me a last, worried look before mounting his own beast and leading his squadron north. I was left standing alone in the swirling chaos, my uncle's words ringing in my ears. Where you belong. The gilded cage, even with its door hanging open amidst the tumult, was still a cage. The memory of Cassian's kiss burned against my lips, a stark contrast to the cold fear slithering in my gut. Was he out there, leading this attack? Had everything between us been a lie, a ploy to lull me into complacency while his house prepared to strike? No. The denial was immediate, instinctive. I knew the shape of his soul now, felt the genuine anguish for his brother, the weight of his own ostracism. This reeked of the older, colder hatred of his father. This was the feud, the mindless beast we were trying to stop, now unleashed and roaring. I couldn't stay. I couldn't hide behind stone walls while the city burned. My magic writhed inside me, not in fear, but in a defiant, rising tide. It was a part of this, a part of me, and it would not be caged. I didn't head for the main gates. Instead, I ran back into the keep, down to the forgotten levels, to the cellars that housed the ancient, sealed vaults. The dagger of Ethel. The hilt. If this attack was the beginning of the end, I would not let our peace be captured or lost. It was a thread of hope, a key to the mystery. The vault door was magically warded, but the magic was old, keyed to Veridian blood. I pressed my palm against the cold, rune-etched stone, and felt the familiar tingle of my power answering its call. The ward shimmered, recognizing the bloodline they were meant to protect, and the massive door slid open with a groan of protesting stone. Inside, on a velvet cushion, lay the hilt. It was heavier than it looked, the jade griffin cool and smooth against my palm. The place where the blade should have been was a jagged, empty socket. As my fingers closed around it, a jolt, like a dormant heartbeat, pulsed through the metal and up my arm. It was alive with latent power. Tucking it securely into my belt, I turned and fled, taking the secret passages out into the night. The city was a vision of hell. The air was thick with smoke and a coppery tang of blood. The sounds were a cacophony of screams, clashing steel, and the terrible shrieks of the war griffins. I moved through the chaos like a wraith, using the shadows, my magic cloaking me in a veil of darkness that made me nearly invisible. I didn't have a plan, only a direction, the river. The central bridge was where the fighting would be thickest. Where he would be. I saw him before he saw me. Cassian was a whirlwind of controlled fury in the midst of the battle on the bridge. He fought without a griffin, his feet planted firmly on the stone, a sword in each hand. He was not the reckless boy from the alley, he was a master warrior, every movement efficient, deadly, and beautiful in its terrible grace. He fought against my uncle's guards, not to kill, I realized with a shock, but to disarm, to disable. He was a dam, holding back the tide of Veridian soldiers trying to push across into the Kragen quarter. Our eyes met across the sea of clashing steel. The world slowed. The sounds of battle faded to a dull roar. In his gaze, I saw no triumph, no hatred. I saw only a mirror of my own horror, my own desperation. He shook his head, a minute, frantic movement. No. Get out of here. A Kragen war griffin, its rider slain, went berserk. It lunged toward a cluster of Veridian infantry, its beak snapping, talons ripping into stone. Without thinking, I acted. I threw out my hands, and the shadows answered. They erupted from the corners of the bridge, from the crevices between stones, solidifying into thick, black chains that wrapped around the beast's legs and wings. It roared in confusion and fury, thrashing against bonds it could not see or understand. The effect was instantaneous. Every fighter on the bridge, Veridian and Kragen alike, froze for a split second, staring at the spectacle of a mythical beast being subdued by pure darkness. And then, all eyes turned to me. I stood revealed, my veil of shadows dissolved from the effort, the emerald of my tunic a blazing beacon in the firelight. Sorcery, a Kragen soldier screamed. Witch, a Veridian voice echoed. I saw the stunned, betrayed look on Kale's face as he landed his griffin nearby. I saw the dawning, murderous comprehension on my uncle's face as he turned from his own duel. But the worst was the look on Cassian's face. It was not anger. It was terror. Pure, undiluted terror for me. The moment of stunned silence broke. My uncle, his face a mask of apocalyptic rage, pointed his sword at me. The Kragen which has ensnared my niece. Seize her. It was the only narrative he could spin. His own flesh and blood wielding forbidden magic was unthinkable. I had to be a victim, a pawn of the enemy. Kale looked from my uncle to me, his loyalties tearing him apart. Lyra, what have you done? Cassian moved. He cut down 2 Veridian soldiers who advanced toward me, placing his body squarely between me and my own house. "Don't touch her," he roared, his voice raw with a power that was more than human. The scene devolved into pure anarchy. It was no longer Veridian against Kragen. It was a maelstrom of confusion, fear, and accusation, with Cassian and me at its eye. From the Kragen side of the bridge, a new figure emerged on a massive, obsidian-scaled wargriffin. Lord Torin Kragen, Cassian's father. His eyes, the same stormy gray as his son's, but cold and dead as a winter sea, swept over the scene. They landed on me, on the shadows still clinging to the ensnared griffin, and then on his son, who was defending me. His lip curled in a snarl of utter contempt. "The cursed blood betrays us for the Veridian whore," he thundered. "Kill them both. Betrayed by my own blood. Hunted by his." Cassian's back pressed against mine. We stood together, surrounded by the armies of both our houses, the river of our shared blood running red below us. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes meeting mine. In them, I saw no surrender. Only a fierce, unbreakable resolve. "It seems we've upset the balance," he said, his voice laced with a wild, desperate humor. I gripped the hilt of the dagger at my belt, feeling its dormant heartbeat sync with my own. The world had declared us enemies. Our families had declared us traitors. But as we stood back to back, ready to fight the world, I knew the truth with a clarity that eclipsed all fear. We were not on the Veridian side. We were not on the Kragen side. We were on our own side. And our war was just beginning. The world narrowed to the circle of death we created on the bridge. Cassian was a maelstrom of steel, his movements a brutal, beautiful dance of deflection and controlled strikes. He was holding back, I realized with a jolt. He was maiming, disarming, but not killing my kin. The effort cost him, a gash opened on his brow, blood sheeting down the side of his face like a crimson tear. I was less graceful, but no less deadly. My magic was my only weapon now, and I wielded it with a desperate, untamed fury. Whips of darkness cracked, disarming swordsmen. Pools of shadow swallowed arrows mid-flight. I was a storm of night in the heart of the fire-lit chaos, a living blasphemy against everything House Veridian stood for. "Lyra, stop this." Kale's voice, anguished, cut through the din. He had dismounted, his sword held loosely, his face a canvas of torment. "Come with me. We can fix this. Uncle will understand you were bewitched." "I am not bewitched, Kale." I shouted back, my voice raw. A Kragen soldier lunged at me, and I threw up a shield of solidified air, the impact throwing him back. "I am awakened." My uncle's voice was a roar of pure hatred. "She is a monster. A Kragen abomination. She is no niece of mine. Kill the creature." His words were a physical blow, severing the last fragile tie to the life I had known. There was no going back. The cage was not just open, it was obliterated. Cassian and I fought our way toward the edge of the bridge, a slow, bloody retreat toward the Kragen quarter. We were a single entity, his steel and my shadow, a perfect, terrifying symmetry. I could feel his movements as if they were my own, anticipating his parries, covering his openings. Our connection, once a whispered thread, was now a roaring river, a confluence of power and purpose. It was Lord Kragen who broke the stalemate. With a bellow of rage, he urged his monstrous wargriffin forward, its obsidian beak aimed directly for Cassian's unprotected back. No. The scream was torn from my throat. Time seemed to fracture. I saw the killing blow descend. I saw Cassian, occupied with 2 Veridian swordsmen, unable to turn. And I felt the hilt of the dagger of Ethel grow burning hot against my hip. I didn't think. I acted. I pulled the hilt from my belt and, drawing on every ounce of power I possessed, I didn't summon a shadow or a shield. I reached for the one thing I knew was connected to it. The missing piece. The blade. Across the bridge, in the scabbard at Lord Kragen's hip, the star-iron blade of the dagger glowed with a sudden, furious silver light. It shrieked in its sheath, a sound of metal and magic, and then it tore itself free. It flew through the air, a sliver of captured moonlight, a homing missile drawn to its other half. It slammed into the hilt I held with a sound like a thunderclap. A shockwave of pure, undiluted power erupted from the reunited dagger of Ethel, blasting outwards in a circle of blinding white light. Men were thrown from their feet. Griffins shrieked and scattered. The very stones of the bridge trembled. When the light faded, I was on my knees, clutching the complete dagger. It hummed in my hand, alive, vibrating with an ancient, awesome power. The fighting had stopped. Everyone was staring, not at me, but at the weapon that shone with the combined legacy of both our houses. Lord Kragen's face was a mask of stunned, avaricious fury. The dagger. She has completed it. Cassian was at my side in an instant, his hand on my shoulder, his body a shield. His eyes were wide with awe and fear. Lyra. But the dagger was not done. It pulsed in my grip, and a new compulsion seized me. It was pulling me, a magnetic force drawing me not toward the Kragen quarter or the Veridian, but down. Toward the center of the bridge. I stumbled forward, Cassian keeping pace, his sword still raised against the stunned, silent armies. I fell to my knees at the exact center of the arch, where the oldest, most worn stone was set. The dagger in my hand flared again, and without my conscious command, I plunged it downward. It did not strike stone. The tip sank into the bridge as if it were water, and the ancient, worn seal at the center glowed with the same blinding light. The ground beneath us groaned, a deep, seismic sound that shook the very foundations of the city. The stone seal dissolved into a swirling, luminous vortex, a doorway. A figure emerged from the doorway, not climbing, but rising as if from water. He was clad in armor of a forgotten design, ethereal and semi-transparent. His face was lined with the weight of centuries, and his eyes held the sorrow of 1,000 lost years. The ghost of King Ethel I. A collective gasp, half terror, half reverence, swept the bridge. My children, his voice echoed in our minds, a sound of crumbling empires and forgotten oaths. You have been deceived. The feud was never yours. It was my burden, my failure, given to you as a poison by the one I trusted most. His spectral gaze swept over the assembled faces, landing with crushing weight on my uncle, Malachi Veridian. You, son of my steward. Your ancestor. He coveted the power of the heart for himself. He could not wield it, so he engineered the schism between my true heirs, turning them against each other, ensuring the dagger would never be reunited, the heart never unlocked. He bound your lines to a cycle of hatred to hide his own treachery. The truth landed with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't about pride or land. It was a lie, a theft perpetuated for generations. The Veridians were not the wronged party. We were the dupes. My uncle's face, pale with shock and rage, confirmed it. The knowledge had been passed down, a dark secret festering in the heart of our house. The power was never meant to be hoarded or weaponized, Ethel's ghost continued, his form beginning to flicker. It was meant to sustain, to create. It is the lifeblood of this land. The magic in your veins is not a curse. It is your birthright. The last echo of my love for this city. His eyes found Cassian and me, kneeling together before him. You have broken the cycle. You have united what was sundered. The heart is yours to protect, to nurture. Do not repeat the sins of the past. Rule, together. With those final, whispered words, his form dissolved into motes of light that swirled around us and then sank into the vortex at our feet. The doorway did not close. Instead, it solidified into a pool of calm, radiant light. From its depths, a soft, pulsing warmth emanated, the true heart of Ethel. Not a weapon, but a source. A promise. The silence on the bridge was absolute. The fight had gone out of everyone. The revelation had disarmed them more completely than any army could. They were soldiers who had just discovered their war was based on a lie centuries in the making. Cassian's hand found mine, our fingers lacing together over the glowing pool. We were no longer just a boy and a girl from rival houses. We were the stewards of the heart. The heirs of a truth that had been buried in blood. He looked at me, his stormy eyes clear for the first time, filled with a terrible, wonderful weight. It seems we have a city to rebuild. I looked back at the ruins of our old lives, at the faces of my family and his, shrouded in shame and confusion. The path ahead was shrouded in mist, fraught with the immense challenge of dismantling a hatred that was older than stone. But his hand was in mine. The heart beat softly beneath our feet, a rhythm of hope against the silence. The tragedy was not our death. It was the centuries of lives wasted for a lie. The beauty was the truth, finally, devastatingly, set free. And as we stood on the threshold of a new world, the first rays of the dawn broke over the horizon, glinting not on swords, but on the tears of a city waking from a long, dark dream. Our story was not a simple ending. It was a complicated, painful, and breathtaking beginning. Together. And so, the bridge was rebuilt, not of stone, but of a truth long forgotten. The heart of Ethel beats on, a secret promise beneath the city, guarded by the love that refused to be its enemy. But this story, our story, doesn't end when the final words are spoken. It lives on in the questions we're left with. What would you have done, standing on that bridge, with your world on one side and your heart on the other? If this journey with Lyra and Cassian moved you, if their forbidden love and the secrets of Ethelgard kept you listening late into the night, then please, let your voice be part of our story. Leave a review and tell me which moment shattered your heart and which one put it back together. Was it the first touch in the library? The kiss by the river? The devastating truth from the ghost of a king? Subscribe to the channel, because more epic Romantasy tales are waiting to be told, filled with dragons, magic, and loves that defy fate. And if you want to ensure stories like this continue, share this audiobook with a fellow fantasy romance lover. Let them get lost in a world where love is the most dangerous magic of all. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing in a love strong enough to end a war. Until the next story.